Hello, we'll have a look at the translational initiation in prokaryotes and eukaryotes. There are similarities, but at the same time there are also a lot of differences. The differences usually stem from the increased complexity in eukaryotes as compared to that of prokaryotes. In prokaryotes, translation and transcription are coupled. As transcription is happening, translation ensues as well as soon as the 5' end of the mRNA keeps coming out. Whereas in prokaryotes, there is a lag because the introns should be removed and exons should be joined or spliced. And also that there is compartmentalization in terms of eukaryotes, that transcription happens in the nucleus, whereas translation happens in the cytoplasm, maybe free or on the rough endoplasmic reticulum. So we'll have a comparison between these two. We'll start off with the prokaryotic initiation of translation. So the small subunit is, when it isn't translating, it's usually bound with initiation factor 3, the one depicted here. And the main job of initiation factor 3 here is to prevent the loading of the 50s subunit, the large subunit, onto the small subunit, so that only the translation would occur, so that initiation can be done. If ribosome is fully formed, then initiation may not be occur, or it cannot identify and bind the mRNA. So then we have the loading of IF2, initiation factor 2, along with GTP, and also initiation factor 1. Initiation factor 1 is responsible for occupying the A site. A site is the site, amino acid site, where the incoming tRNAs usually happen during the elongation phase. And peptidyl site is where the peptide is actually growing, and the exit site. So the peptidyl site, the amino acid site, the A site, should be blocked from binding of any secondary or the other charged tRNAs. Therefore, the initiation factor 1 works for blocking it. Initiation factor 2 has affinity for 1 as well as also has affinity for the initiator tRNA. Here, this is representing the initiator tRNA, and here assume that it's in the amino acid N-formyl methionine. That is an additional formyl group on the amino group of methionine. So because the GTP bound IF initiation factor 2 has affinity for initiator tRNA, it will help in the loading of the initiator tRNA to the P site. This is the P site where the start codon would have been there. And now we have the 30S pre-initiation complex or initiation complex. So we have 30S subunit, we have IF3, IF1 and IF2 in GTP bound IF2, which is in active state, and also the initiator tRNA at the P site, that is binding base pairing with the start codon. Then we have the binding of the 50S subunit, that is the large subunit would come and bind to the 30S initiation complex, and this can only happen if initiation factor 3 has been removed. So the first loss, upon the loss of initiation factor 3, IF3, the large subunit will come and bind to the 30S subunit. And this is followed by the release of initiation factor 1 and 2, and the GTP that is bound to IF2 is hydrolyzed to GDP and PI. So initiation factor 2 does no longer have affinity for the initiator tRNA and the ribosome itself, so it will fall off. And now what we are left with is an empty A site where tRNA could come, and the P site is occupied by the initiator tRNA along with the N-formyl methionine and the exit site. And now we have 70S initiation complex, and it is good to go for elongation, meaning that new tRNA could come in and then peptidyl transfer and the remaining events of elongation. This is what happens in prokaryotic initiation complex. So if we want to remember it, I would remember I have 1, 2, 3. Function of 3 is to block the large subunit to bind to the small subunit. 1 is to occupy the A site, so no tRNA comes in, and 2 is to bring the initiator tRNA. And once these are accomplished and the mRNA is bound, we have a 30S subunit 30S initiation complex formation. IF3 is lost, large subunit comes by, and then we have the loss of initiation factor 2 and 1. So the initiation factor 2 GTPase activity is important, and that GTPase, once the GTP is hydrolyzed to GDP and inorganic phosphate, we have loss of affinities.